Okay, today I have the opportunity to speak to somebody that's it's kind of new to me. I got a ping on email from someone who's like, "Hey, check out some of the stuff I'm doing," and I checked it out, and it caught my attention big time. This guy's name's Chris Rucks, and what caught my attention was a book that he wrote with the powerful title of "Don't Make Beats Like Me." Anytime a book will give me kind of a snort laugh at the beginning, I'm in. And so I got the book, and I've been going through it, and it's actually really interesting because it sort of transcends the typical production advice, and really a lot of it is kind of life advice and success advice, but it's all with its arms well wrapped around music production. So I thought it would be great for us to talk to Chris. Wow, I talked a bunch. Let's talk to Chris Rux. Hey, man, how's it going?
It's going pretty good, man. How are you?
All right. Well, hey, thanks a lot for taking time out of your schedule and having a chat. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you for having me on.
Sure. Why don't you fill us in a little bit about what you're currently doing, and particularly a little bit about this book, Don't Make Beats Like Me?
So I'm currently in book selling mode. Uh, we get so comfortable in the actual creation process of making a thing, and then once that thing has been made, we have to shift to selling that thing, and that's a completely different mindset. So that's kind of where I am right now, is promoting the project and kind of putting myself out there as the person behind it. And it developed out of me being in a very interesting position of suddenly helping producers. I had been a producer myself, and I was working with an awesome company that provided resources and events for aspiring producers.
Okay.
And me being around all of these producers, 100 of them at a time, I suddenly started to see behaviors that I saw myself. We were kind of all repeating the same bad habits. And it was a startling moment for me. I was like, wow, I've done that. I know what that looks like. And that became the foundation for me creating the book.
That's really interesting. Now, um, the the book that the book that you created, it's sort of it kind of reminds me in the way that it's structured of sort of like some of these books like the 48 Laws of Power and some of the other books that kind of help you identify where you're at and think about ways to improve that part of your work. And you actually kind of move around a lot of different parts of the hustle of being a producer. Um,
hmm
you say that this came from working, from interacting with people in this environment where you were kind of helping producers, and you say that it was kind of based on bad habits you saw. What were the things that immediately jumped out as you as so typical of producers that weren't going anywhere?
My philosophy about production is that the producer is the most important tool in the studio. Um, it doesn't matter how great your hardware is, how amazing your sounds are. If you have bad habits and bad ways of thinking, it will affect your entire career. What I kind of saw around me was things that I was doing at different points in my production career, whether that was my fear of networking, holding on to my music, and kind of this fear of songs being wasted on opportunities, doubting myself. You put yourself in a room with so many other creators of music, and we start to repeat those same mistakes. So that's kind of a sampling of the things that I saw around me.
Sure. Well, and that actually kind of aligns with the things that your book covers, because a lot of it, my read of it, I kind of burned through it really quick. It's a great read, by the way.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah. One of the things I noticed, there's a lot of different ways that you approach the idea of fear. And it's for some reason this has come up a lot this week. This discussion of fear kind of being the enemy. But
hmm
it also, the way that you talk about it in a book actually points out how a lot of different, maybe bad habits or instinctual behaviors are all kind of different versions of fear. Whether it's like focusing too much on the gear, or if
Mm,
it's being scared to get out there and network, or if it's
right.
or if it's even like I don't want to deal with the business side of the business. So much of that is related more to the fear of doing something you either don't know or you're not comfortable with as anything. And I thought that that was a really interesting way to approach it, because until I'd read it, I hadn't really considered all those things related to the same core issue.
Yeah, that's a great take. Fear is so powerful. It's so powerful. And if we really, I mean, we put two producers with the same talent, skill, and equipment side by side, and one will have significant success compared to the other. And it's that producer has an ability to conquer those things that scare the hell out of him in his pursuit. And like the things you mentioned, dealing with business, wasting time on getting lost in the gear. That second producer, he's kind of stuck with these roadblocks that hamper his career and may not even realize it. He may be sitting there in frustration. I've got the equipment. I'm talented. Why aren't I getting farther? But this other guy, he's conquering those other parts of himself that allow him to move forward. And like I said, when you're around a group of producers, you start to analyze, okay, this guy's winning. What is he doing differently? And you see the conquering of these elements within that contribute to more success in the long term.
When you were in this environment where you were like with 100 producers, could you, was it the kind of thing where you could kind of like eyeball the people that were successful like in the first minute? Was it that apparent, or did you have to dig more to find out who was doing it and who was just making it up?
There were tells that you
Yeah.
could kind of identify. Who was adamant about meeting everyone else? Who was ready to play their music immediately? Who had that fearlessness of putting themselves out there, willing to be exposed. And
Interesting.
that's so powerful as a creator and a musician who's willing to be exposed. And so you see these things and you're able to identify, okay, that guy's got a twinkle in his eye. He's ready to die in front of everyone here. I see that.
That's interesting. So now, your book is got this great name, and believe me, it literally jumped off the Amazon shelf at me. Right? Don't make beats like me, which really makes me want to know more about your beat making career. Right? But
Hmm.
even more than that, I one of the kind of standard things about my podcast is I like hearing about people's background and how they got to the place that they are. Well, you've gone through quite some path to end up as an author. I am curious what that path looks like. How did you get started in music? How did you become a producer? And what got you to the point where you were in reflective or reflecting on what you did to the level that you could write this book?
Okay. Let me try to tackle all of that
All
for you.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, that's like 20 questions worth, but
No,
we'll just
no,
go
it's
with it.
all good. So I've always been a music fiend of some sort, which I got from my father. My father listens to everything, and I listen to everything. And my freshman year of college, 2000, I ran across a producer in my dorm room who was working on an MPC 2000. And I stopped in and we talked briefly. I thought it looked cool, and then I walked away. Years later, I kicked myself for not being more curious at that moment. But eventually, 4 years later, in my senior year, I got into production and I started off with, I think Fruity Loops was the first program. Fruity Loops or Acid were my first programs. And my last semester of college, I actually had signed up for an audio production course, digital music. which was a great idea, but just had the most I had the most awful reaction to it. They were using Digital Performer, and I joke in my book that Digital Performer back in the day was like NASA level
Right.
satellite controlling
Yeah, yeah.
software, and that was the wrong program to start early with. And I just had this adverse reaction to using something so deep, and I was like, I'm not doing this stuff, and I'm sticking to sampling an acid and where it's easier. So I hopped onto an MPC 1000, had a bunch of records, cutting up samples, jazz, soul, cool stuff. Eventually got into Logic, and then landed on Reason. Reason was the last program I used before I slowed down. All the while this was happening, I left college, graduated. I was in Chicago for a brief minute, then went to Atlanta, and I was looking for a way to work in the business, in the music business, while I was making beats.
Hmm.
And I found a great company called Dynamic Producer, which is like the godfather of production aspiring producer companies in terms of throwing events and sending music to labels and music licensing and all of this stuff. And I was like, this is really cool and really weird that I'm a producer, but I'm here responsible for creating this experience for other producers. And that's where the aha moment came from, when I saw kind of my failures being repeated by the producers around me. And that's kind of when I started writing chapters of the book. And I would eventually go on to do music licensing, which again put me in an arena where I was around hundreds of producers at a time.
Right.
So I spent years in the company of my clan, so to speak, kind of observing and seeing their behaviors. And it gave me all of this knowledge that I could kind of fuse with my own experience to kind of create the book. And the book is written from the perspective of my failures. That's what the title is about. Don't do these things that I did because they tanked my career, my ability to even create a career. And I wanted to supplement my failure with success. And so, because I had been in these positions, I had access to producers who had the Grammys and the platinum plaques. And I sat down with a handful of them, famous guys, and I said, "Tell me, your secrets. Tell me what happened here. How did you do this?" And we got very deep and personal into what kind of went into their success and their failures. So the book eventually became this 360 view of what not to do and what to do. And I think the end result kind of makes it unique of books in the production space, period.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I mean, first of all, incredibly ballsy of you to sort of like basically to put it right out there to say the foundation of this book is my failure. Let's talk about why it didn't have to be that. And I congratulate you for being able to do that, you know.
Thank
But
you.
beyond that, though, I think it's also interesting in that it isn't just a memoir of failures. Instead, it's like, here's the thing that happened. I, looking back, I disappointed myself because of this, but now here's what I could have done. Here's what other people have done. And you sort of like take that as more of an object lesson than sort of like oh, I just fell off the rails on this one. Instead of moping about it, you use it really as sort of like a parable, and then you work in all this other stuff. And you had some amazing people that you work with on the book.
Yeah, I was fortunate to not only get awesome producers who have their own history and brand, but the way that they were willing to sit down and kind of share themselves was something unique. We don't often get that kind of access to a person's inner workings, and they were all willing to sit there and kind of bare themselves and show the good and the bad. So yeah, it took the project to a new level.
Interesting. Yeah, it was quite interesting, and again, the breadth of the stuff. Now, one of the things I liked, especially, I've always been really fascinated. I find the producers to be amazing people, but I have always been fascinated with the beat makers, right? The people that are kind of in the trenches, burning out burning out beats. And
Mm,
maybe just some of it is just my fascination going back to like Jay Dillon, what some of these guys were doing. But also, there used to be what was the name of it? Was it Scratch Magazine or something? That was a magazine kind of it was,
hmm.
that was specifically about the beat makers, right?
Right.
And I always was curious why more of those people that were really hot at making beats, how very few of them ever scaled up to becoming full-fledged producers. Do you have any insight as why that might be?
Yeah, I have an entire chapter on it. I talk about there's a progression. Well, first, I like to always say that I don't look down on beat makers. I don't use the term beat maker as a negative thing.
Uh-huh.
Some people do.
Mm.
On the journey, the road, beat maker is just a pit stop. If you're looking for longevity and, to be in the realm of, the great producers, you have a much longer road to go. And I think my philosophy in the book was people get comfortable with the responsibility of a beat maker. I can sit in my room by myself and I can churn out music. Yes, there are difficulties in that, but to be a producer requires a whole new level of responsibility. The producer has to go out and create this network of artists and songwriters. The producer has to put his businessman hat on. He has to understand points, publishing, contracts, publishing deals, all of these things. The producer he's responsible for formulating albums, creating songs, not just handing off beats. And so I think it's a level of comfort. It's scary to move into producer land. It's a lot more work to move into producer land. And so that's why I think a lot of people kind of pause there, which is totally fine. If that's what you want for yourself,
Hmm.
then by all means. But if you're aspiring to become the producer, then you have to realize, okay, I'm only taking a break at this level, at this plateau. I have to keep climbing.
Right. I get it. Well, one of the things that you talked about right there too that really kind of like jumped out the microphone was this idea of as a beat maker you really do have the are in the comfortable spot of being able to work by yourself,
Hmm.
where the role of producer is almost antithetical to that. There's no way you can legitimately be a producer, in your mom's basement. It just can't work. You have to
Right.
interact with too many people and you have responsibilities both with other people and for other people in order
Hmm.
to fulfill that role.
Hmm. Absolutely. That's what a producer is. I think it was Focus or DJ Khalil. They were saying in the book that the way we describe producers today is a new phenomenon. It's not accurate. The producer was the Quincy Jones, who was responsible for bringing this group of people together who all had their own unique genius. And when you assembled them, that's when magic happened. The beat maker working solo only has his perspective, which can be great and can certainly get the job done. But what happens when you kind of amass other people who have their own perspective, their own genius to create a product? And so, like you said, that's where the producer actually lives, bringing together people with himself to create something that's lasting and rich.
Right. In your experience, and I didn't actually find a place in the book where he talked about this, but it's a curiosity of mine,
Hmm.
which is when you talk to producers, some of them will be involved in doing their own beats or at least doing a lot of their own, recording and production work, in terms of the producing of the sound, right?
Hmm.
And others sort of want to have a little bit of an arm's length to some of that so that they don't get too sucked into the details and forget the overriding production that they're involved in. Do you think that one of those things is preferable to the other? Do you think it's just all how an individual works best?
I think the goal matters, and
Mm.
what are you working on? If you're working on, your own project, if you're churning out beats alone, then sure, get into the weeds, get deep. Going back to our what we just discussed, if you're at producer level, you kind of have to have this overarching view, the bird's eye view, to kind of see the whole project, especially if you're like doing an album or shaping an artist for an EP, or kind of working to develop an artist. You got to be able to stand back and see the entire picture and how those little pieces fit together to the larger scope that you're trying to create. So it depends on the goal.
Sure. In your book, do you talk at all about sort of the protege type process, either a budding producer being a protege of someone who's an experienced producer, or a producer who's bringing on an artist as a protege? Do you touch on that much in the book?
I don't get into the artist aspect, but I do talk about the importance of having a mentor, and I like the notion of having someone in person that you can sit down with and kind of absorb from. Focus talks about his time as a protege of Dr. Dre,
Hmm.
which is the ultimate level protege that you can get to. That's
Right.
the highest level of protege you can be at, and it's so critical to be in the space in the company of someone who's better than you. You will learn infinitely, and it will raise your game to such a level that's hard to achieve alone in your own room. It's not an easy relationship to create. Sometimes it has to become a business relationship, sometimes not. But regardless, if you can safely create a way to be in the space of a genius, then absolutely. It's just another tool that helps you evolve in your craft, among the many you can choose from.
Sure. Coming up, did you have someone who mentored you?
I did not. I talked about two instances in my book where I specifically went out of my way to spend time with a superior producer. It didn't turn into long-term relationships, but even in the day or two I spent with those guys, I learned infinitely, which is just an example of how powerful that tactic can be for kind of evolving you as a creator. Even if you get short doses of it, it's still crazy what it can do for you.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting because that concept sort of comes up in a lot of different environments. I remember back when I was when I thought I was going to try and be a jazz musician.
Mm,
One of the first bits of advice I got from a more experienced musician was always put yourself in a position where you're the worst person in the band, because that's how you'll learn the most, right?
mm,
And
mm,
likewise, you hear oftentimes, like with athletes, they're told, put yourself in a position where you're in over your head and you have to work your ass off in order to just stay even with everyone else. But
mm.
that's the thing that's going to that's going to hone your edge better than surrounding yourself with duffers and looking like a star, because you're
Yeah.
not a star in that environment, not really.
And what's interesting about my desire to put this book out is that, you have that wisdom that we hear, but it's been applied to every other endeavor
Right.
except for making music. So I wanted to create a book that took some of those themes and that advice that you can get on losing weight, or starting a business, or this or that.
Being a baseball star, right?
Baseball star. How many books are there on being a baseball star?
Right.
The production community is so overlooked in terms of specific knowledge created for them. So I wanted to take those elements and those that wisdom and that kind of advice and put it in a central place for producers and music makers, because the truth be told, it's extremely difficult to create success as a music creator. It's always been difficult, and it's probably more difficult in this era of music than before. And so I think you just need as much as possible. If there are, only 20 books on production, you should have all 20 of them. If it's going to give you the opportunity to sharpen yourself and become better, and will push you forward towards what you have decided your goal or success is.
Given that you were working with Dynamic Producer, and given that you're in the middle of, embedding yourself in writing books about this, why do you think that there's so little information about this? Is it that there just aren't enough gigs to try? I mean, it seems like a lot of people want to be producers. You would
A
think
lot.
that we'd be overrun with people giving advice.
Well, the first thing is I think there's an incredible people have incredibly underestimated the difficulty of production. It's very sexy, it's very cute, it's very popular, and we all come into it, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and say, "I'm going to make beats, and I'm going to be Pharrell next week."
Mm-hmm.
And you get caught up in the love of creating music, which is a beautiful thing. But you have to have the proper level of respect for the difficulty of it. And that's where everyone gets caught up in the meat grinder. And that being naive about it creates this thing where we don't create books, nor do we read them about this goal. You don't think you need one until 10 years later, you're like, damn, this is not panning out how I thought it would. So this is why I wanted to write the book, so you can get this information early and understand, damn, okay, I'm going to have to raise myself, several levels just to come at this.
Yeah, well, I think that that's actually really important too, because if it takes you 10 years to figure out some of the basic mistakes, you're almost at the end point of what could be a career by the time you get your shit together, right?
Yeah, time is
Time's,
incredibly important to this.
yeah, it's really valuable, right?
That was another factor. I can save you time. You don't have to go through the mistakes that I made, or that, DJ Khalil made, or that the business made. It's here. I just warned you that this is coming. So I can shave off time from that 10 years and allow you to refocus on another aspect that will help you. So that's critically important too. And the other thing is, you know, a lot of successful producers are busy producing. So, there's not a there's not a whole bunch of people who have the time nor energy to sit there and write an entire book. I'm a writer. I've been a writer all my life, and it still took me years to put this thing together. So there's a shortage of voices who have the time or ability to kind of give back.
Yeah, that's a great point. Producers are actually busy producing.
Right.
It's a very good point. So you kind of mentioned that you have put your music production thing on a bit of a pause. Is it just because you want to focus on the writing, or do you have a specific love of the writing, or were you getting burnt out in music? What happened there?
So I'm actually a writer first and foremost.
Mm.
I've been writing, and that's kind of the weird thing about the book. I kind of discovered later on that I was a writer moonlighting as a producer, as opposed to the opposite. So I'm a writer first and foremost, and that's kind of where my creative output nowadays is. In terms of slowing down, I was working on the book, I was doing my thing in sync licensing, and the music kind of got squeezed out, which happens.
Yeah.
That's kind of a reality for a lot of people. Eventually, you get to this point where you're doing music less and less, and it becomes nothing. And that's a sad moment for a lot of us. The thing that's been interesting, though, is that in my time away, I realized that I was a beat maker out of time. And what I mean by that is I recognize now that I'm more of a instrumental guy, like the Mad Lib, Mind Design, pure instrumental era. And that's who I feel like I was before that was really a thing.
Mm.
Instrumental hip hop, or not even just hip hop, instrumental music beats. It's kind of a new concept where these guys are making names for themselves, and they got Spotify pages and they're doing shows. Like, that didn't really exist, 10 years ago when I was making beats. So I was trying to squeeze myself into something that wasn't really there. And
Hmm.
so if I was starting now, I would be pure instrumentals, kind of just going in my own direction, funky, cool, jazzy sounds without the pressure of trying to squeeze an artist on top of what I was making.
Right, right. Well, that's that's actually really interesting to realize, to recognize that sometimes it's not only, if you have skills, but it's also what your timing is like, right? If the mores of society happen to align with where you're at, you stand a chance. And if not, then you just might be in the wrong place at the wrong time too.
Yeah, which is scary.
Yeah.
That's scary as hell as a creator to recognize that you may be before or behind. How many artists, are there now who we recognize, 20 years later, and we're like, yo, this is incredible. But back then, nobody gave a damn, you
Right,
know?
right.
That's a scary prospect, but it happens all the time. And unfortunately, you have to acknowledge that in music and art and film and creativity, there's this game of chance that we play. There are things that is as hard as we can work. There are things that are out of our control, and timing is one of them. You have to hope that you're in the right time.
Yeah, yeah. Good point. So if you were to be the coach on a sideline of somebody who had a future goal of becoming a producer,
Hmm.
what's the path that you would suggest for them to take? Because one of the things that your book actually really kind of orients itself towards is somebody who is like a beat maker or a music maker of some sort, and it's sort of like, how do you focus in on becoming successful in production, right? What about somebody who's not yet there? What are the steps? I mean, would you mentioned like you saw this guy in a room at your dorm, and he was like doing beats on an MPC. I mean, would you steer people towards, find a small, like an MPC, and go off in the corner and focus on this thing and don't get distracted by a million VSTs? Or would you say bury yourself in a million VSTs and learn what they all do? Or would you have them go to a music production class? Because now there's stuff that's maybe a little more oriented towards hip hop beat design and stuff like that, and they could probably get a maybe a more valuable education from some of that. What would be your suggestions for people who need that, who want to kind of like step off the pier and have a good first experience?
In a perfect world, well, let me first say that there's no such thing as a perfect world, but
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
going to answer this question as if I had perfection.
Okay.
Um, in a perfect world, the first thing I'll be looking for is youth. Youth is critical for music makers. We forget that some of the greatest musicians in jazz, rock, soul, these guys started young. They were in high school band when they got together and formed their megastar groups. So I think youth is important because it gives time to perfect your craft. It also delays adulthood, which, once you become an adult and, you're wearing your tie to work and all of this stuff, it becomes harder to focus on the craft.
Right.
So youth is always key. I look for talent. Not to say that if you're not the most talented person, you can't find your way. But I say in the book, talent is a factor. And we can't lie and say that it isn't. So youth, talent. As far as equipment, I say get comfortable. If you're comfortable on an incredibly complex platform, do it. If you're comfortable on something that's simple like Fruity Loops, do it. If you want to do hardware, do it. If you want to do software, do it. Whatever is comfortable for your workflow, where you're churning out music and you can master your equipment, that's my advice. I firmly believe in going in a corner and working nonstop for years. And then I think there's a certain point where, okay, we have the machine going on creativity. Now we have to work on you as a person, because that's where the trick is really going to be. Are you comfortable dealing with people? Are you comfortable in these awkward, sometimes dangerous situations with people in the music business? Are you fearful of signing deals, taking opportunities, being responsible for creating albums? How do we get you as a person to the level where you can exist and compete and thrive in this kind of environment? There's a focus on the creative, and then the second half is on the person. How do I shape this person so that they can survive and thrive in this environment?
That's really interesting. So one of the things you mentioned was, that talent is a portion of that. What is talent, and how do you identify it in yourself to determine whether you even if you have it or not? I mean, how what are you know what I'm saying? It's like how
Yeah, I
how
know.
can you how can you be reflective enough to be able to say, oh, no, I'm not really talented in this thing I'm trying to do.
That's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
I talk about, I forget the term. It's like a sound deprivation box where it's impossible to not impossible. It's very difficult to hear yourself objectively because you're so close to your music. I think the people around you will let you know if you have talent, and I think your results will tell you if you have talent,
Hmm.
which can still be misleading. You can get a quick couple of hits and assume that you're at a certain level, and then be gone 6 months later. And we've seen that happen too many times in music. It's difficult to judge talent. It really is. But for me, kind of being the outsider, I hear it. You know, when I hear something that I have to kind of stop and think about it, like, man, well, that's a really interesting chord, or that melodic phrase is crazy.
Hmm.
You wrote that, huh? Like, when I have to stop and think about what you're doing, I know talent. And what's also crazy is, there was a producer I met years ago, and I think it was at a beat battle of some sort, and he played a track, and I listened to it, and it was a horn based production, and I went and talked to him afterwards, and I said, so tell me your story. And he was like, yeah, so I was in band during college, and I was like, there it is. I can hear your education. I can hear an understanding of music, and that's kind of where the talent is for me. When I can tell that you understand how the pieces are supposed to fit together and flow together.
Yeah, right. Well, not only to have that knowledge, but to actually make it apparent in the music. You're right. That's that whole thing of like getting your own voice and having it be unique.
Right.
Yeah. Chris, I'm curious now that you've tackled everything it takes to become a massively successful producer, what's next for you? What's your next book?
I'm trying to figure that out now, man.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. Things have changed so much in the years that I've spent working on this book. And now that it's out, I have to kind of figure out what's my next way to be of service.
Sure.
Which, I don't know yet. I think taking a little time after kind of, doing the whole book marketing thing, I'm going to sit back and figure out, what's the next way that I can help and be of assistance. Kind of survey the business, and maybe it's being an advocate for some songwriters, or maybe it's trying to be a part of the group who's working on changing the digital royalty structure or something like that. I'm not sure.
Well, I imagine doing this book has opened some interesting doors for
Yeah,
you.
man, I'm in the process of opening those doors now. It's kind of had the reaction that you've had to it. People are like, "Whoa, what is this?" So that's great because you really don't know how something's going to resonate
Right.
with an audience until you put it out. So yeah, people have some interesting reactions and kind of they're digging what the message is and looking for ways to help. So yeah, that's been awesome.
One last question. I can't believe we burned through our time already, but we have. One last question though. So I've spun through the book and it's a great read. I'm going to go through in a little more detail, a little slower and more focused. But
Mhm.
what would be your suggestion as the next step? I read through the book, I start building those things. What else should I be looking at? What are sort of like life changes you think that should happen, or is it social changes, or what do you think what is like the next step? What would you propose as a next step for people who finished your book?
I think it's critical first and foremost to realize that you didn't finish it. And that's the mark for me of a good book when I have to keep going back to it to remind myself or make sure I fully understood the lesson. It's not a book that you can just read and be done and put it on your shelf and let it gather dust. There's too much in it. There are too many behaviors that you have to change. So that's number one. You're not really done with it. Two, like you have to be objective and honest with yourself when you read it. I've had people read the book and then still continue with the very behavior that I just called them out for. And so there's this level of objectivity that's crucial when you read something like this. The willingness to be able to say, okay, I know I'm doing this. I've got to stop now because I'm gonna pay a price for it sooner or later. So I think that's the first two things. And then if you're objective and if you're going back to it, zone in on something that's particular to your situation. There are 24 laws in there. Some of them are going to hit home for you. And so whatever that situation or law is, are you willing to cease that activity or begin that activity? If you're kind of looking to make the leap between beat maker and producer, for example, okay, today's Thursday. On Friday, are you going to start looking for artists to work for? Are you going to take that leap and figure out what it's like to recruit songwriters to start making songs instead of beats? So how will you act? What is the action you will take?
Yeah, right on. Yeah, that's realistically that's one of the things I clearly got out of the book was that there are calls to action here, and I think that that's something that every one of us can benefit from. So, well, Chris, I want to thank you so much again for taking the time out of your schedule. It was great talking to you. It's great getting filled in on your vision for the book, but your vision for our lives as producers as well. It's really fantastic, man.
No, I've appreciated this entire experience, man. This has been awesome. So thank you for having me.
All right, man. With that, I'm going to let you go then. Have a good one.
You as well. Thank you.
Many thanks to Chris for the chat. It was a lot of fun talking to him about his perspectives as well as his work. Remember, if you want to check out the book, it's called Don't Make Beats Like Me. Still, I say one of the great titles out there. You can check it out on don'tmakebeats.com. It's also available on both Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I got the Kindle version of it so that I could get a quick turnaround on it. Worked great for me. So check it out. I want to thank you, the listeners, again for showing up this week. We've got a lot of interesting stuff kind of all over the map over the next couple of months. I'm really looking forward to sharing some new kinds of people with you. So With that, I'm going to say goodbye for this week, and we'll catch you next time around. Bye.